created, the Progressive or People's Party. Roosevelt actually was almost nominated as the Republican candidate, almost dethroning an incumbent president, and if he had stuck the course, he might have actually won the Republican nomination. Roosevelt and Taft fought one another and split the Republican vote. And as history has shown time and time again, splitting the vote just leads to, well, the other guy getting it. Wilson got the majority and became president. If Taft simply didn't run for office again, or if Roosevelt and his coalition overthrew him in the 1912 Republican National Convention, Roosevelt would run as the Republican against Wilson. And in a race between Teddy and Wilson, well, we all know who would win. Wilson only got 42% of the popular vote. Alternate 1913. The world is on the cusp of war, and Theodore Roosevelt begins his third term as president. And this would be the term that he knew would define him as a global leader. You see, the election of 1912 was probably the most important election in American history. Wilson and Roosevelt had staunchly opposite opinions on where the U.S. should stand once the Great War began. Wilson wanted absolutely nothing to do with the war, which seems reasonable. It was an opinion shared by most Americans. Why get involved in the most deadly conflict in human history that seemed to be fought between bickering neighbors? But Wilson had his own, well, Wilson reasons for doing so as well. Remember that shiny beacon ideal he had? That America was the start of a new age of civilization? He saw war as the antithesis to this great democracy against European. Intervening in Latin America, or nations in his mind not developed enough for democracy. When this war was to be over, he dreamed America would be the mediator between the two sides and create a middle ground as the moral leader for the West. Picking a side would only ruin such a dream. In fact, even when it came to the final moment in 1917, Germany started back up their unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking neutral ships and offering to Mexico to invade the United States. Wilson still was uneasy, but the tides had changed too far, and he realized America had to get involved. But this time, with a twist on his original idea. America still would retain its moral character while going to war, but only because it wasn't fighting for petty reasons like Britain, France, or Russia, but to make the world safe for democracy. Sound familiar? By the time that 1917 rolled around, Roosevelt had practically ripped out his mustache while demanding for the U.S. to go to war. After the Lusitania was sunk, Roosevelt knew that war was inevitable and wrote furiously that Wilson was a coward for being so indecisive. You see, Roosevelt was a polar opposite opinion. He wanted the U.S. to get into the war to show that it was a real global power. He saw the Great War as an opportunity to finally flex some American muscle and change the globe through force. Now, I know that sounds bad for the U.S. to get itself involved purely to show off, but if Roosevelt was actually president and really did get America into the war by 1915, ironically, most of the pains and sufferings of the 20th century, as we know them, might not have happened. I know, it's weird, but here's the thing about idealism. It's idyllic. Wilson wanted a world without war, where America was this bastion of morality, but people don't work like that. And his idealism turned into something far worse than just colonial squabbles. The Lusitania sinks in this alternate 1915. I have no doubt that if Teddy was president, the United States would have mobilized for war within a few months. Now I say mobilized. This was 1915. Even after declaring war, it still took months for troops to be ready, supplies to be organized, and men shipped over the Atlantic. In our timeline, even though the U.S. entered the to get an extra month of North for free. Now, back to our scheduled talking picture. By 1916, in our timeline, both sides had stalemated. Germany was running out of options as a British blockade slowly strangled its economy and resources. However, France, Britain, and Russia weren't faring too well either. Both sides expected the war to be won by now, but the meta of the time was really imbalanced, favoring defense instead of offense. Railroad
has nothing to do with the crime scene or the crime that they witnessed.